I think that when you think about like the environmental concern that comes from agriculture, a huge part of it is, how do you feed the world?
Coming up on episode 356 of The Modern Acre, we're talking climate sustainability investments with Grant Mulligan of AlTi Tiedemann Global.
The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, be sure to check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by American Ag Credit. American Ag Credit is a proud member of the Farm Credit System, which was created more than 100 years ago with the sole purpose of serving the financial needs of farmers and ranchers. From small farms to the largest agribusiness enterprises, American Ag Credit understands agriculture and how to structure customized financial solutions. Just like many of the guests we have on the pod, American Ag Credit recognizes that the evolution of agriculture is inevitable and exciting. Their goal is to be at the forefront of this evolution, partnering with producers to grow their future in ways they haven't imagined yet. To learn more about American Ag Credit and to receive exclusive access to reports from Terrain, a research and insight service of American Ag Credit, visit agloan.com/terrain or hit the link in our show notes.
Ty, it's been a while. Should we do a Parenting Corner check-in?
Let's do it. I think you have a good one to start.
Yep. So just got through a very, very long weekend of potty training. Daughter's now at 2.5, which is crazy how quick that has gone. But trying to introduce potty training, you introduced it to this method where you basically hunker down for a weekend, you cold turkey it, you get rid of all the diapers, and you said it was intense, and it was quite intense. I barely made it through the weekend, but hopefully the investment pays off. I think she's on the right track now to move in that direction. But pretty funny, like Friday morning, we walk around the house like, okay, no more diapers, and walking around all the different spots where we have diapers, put them in a garbage bag and literally pretend to throw them in the garbage can of like, all right, no more diapers. This is it. We're in big girl underwear, and went through the morning, few accidents, but got it pretty much dialed now. We're like 5 days in and starting to see light at the end of the tunnel.
It's hilarious. I mean, I try to warn you. I was like, as honest as I could be of it's worth it, but it's literally the worst weekend of your life. Like, it is terrible. But then once you're through it, you're through it. And yeah, you were still shocked. I don't think anything could prepare you. It's like when people say, you know, you can't prepare for having your first child. Like, there's really nothing I can say. Potty training is definitely similar. It
was those kind of vibes. And yeah, incentivizing good behavior with M&Ms. She was getting that. And now that she's kind of got the potty dialed, she wants to basically show her stuffed animals how to use the potty. And so that's been a really good hack of like, I want to show the dinosaur how to go potty, the octopus how to go potty. And so it's a very fun game now. So we're getting there.
That's amazing. All right, Tim, I have a quick story. This is like less about parenting and more just a funny story that includes my children. But we were hanging out in the garage. I think they were having dinner. We had gotten Costco hot dogs. My wife was getting things cleaned up in the house. We're in the garage, and this guy comes up. We hear some like dog barking and stuff. My daughter was out kind of on the scooter and comes. She's scared of this dog, and we're like, well, we don't know what's going on. And then we're back in the garage as a group. I look out. There's a neighbor standing there with like a wiener dog in his arms, looking at me, just like fear in his eyes. And he says, "Can you help me?" I was like, sure, man. And so basically he has like these 3 wiener dogs, and he couldn't corral them all. So I picked up one. And we walk. I don't know where this guy lives, how far it is. I have the girls with me. They're like, I don't know if they should come, if they should stay, but they just kind of are shocked at what's happening. Dad picked up this dog. It's this wiener dog. The wiener dog is just completely in my arms, totally stoic, just like. And my daughters are like in amazement. Like, Dad is holding this dog, and we walk down like the length of the street, and my daughter is literally just wearing her underwear, and we're walking down barefoot. I'm holding this dog. It was, I'm sure, just like the most ridiculous sight. We get it to this guy's house, get all the wiener dogs in the house safe and sound, and head back. But it was pretty funny. The girls just like so confused. What is dad doing? But they were happy that we helped out.
It's a great story.
Enough of Parent Corner. We got to jump into this conversation with Grant. Grant is awesome. He is totally in the community of regenerative agriculture, investing in agriculture, has a background in biology and science, but now is on the investment side of things, working with AlTi, which is a wealth manager, working with different clients who want to put their money to good use, invest in impact projects that also generate a really good return. So we get into kind of how AlTi is structured, how they look at investments and impact, and what some examples of those are, and then just look at Grant's take on the industry at large of where he thinks the space is going. You guys are going to love this conversation. We got a ton of value out of it. So let's jump in with what's top of mind for Grant.
I've been thinking about agriculture, food and agriculture in the context of human progress a lot lately. And when I spend most of my time working on climate sustainability strategies, and agriculture keeps coming back as a really core piece of what we're trying to do to decarbonize the economy. But much more broadly, it touches all the other things that we're worried about related to climate change. Biodiversity loss, 50% of all hospitable land on Earth is for agriculture. People's livelihoods. 120 years ago, 3/4 of the world worked in agriculture. Today, that number is less than a quarter. So that's a massive shift in trend in the way people work and the kind of way they show up in the economy. And then it's also like the single biggest driver of human progress. Over the last 100 years, we went from 2/3 of humanity living in hunger on a consistent basis, according to the League of Nations. And now that number's below 10%. So when I think about like kind of investing in ag and the space that we're in, I just kind of can't help but get away of every problem we're thinking on and we're trying to solve is represented somehow in agriculture. And it makes it, one, I think, really intellectually interesting, and also highlights, these some real problems we got to address, but also gives me a lot of hope and for the opportunities that are out in front of us.
You are getting me excited. I can't wait to talk about your strategy and approach and the projects you're working on. But before we dive into that, Grant, maybe let's learn a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you into the ag space.
Yeah, so I started my career actually as a wildlife biologist, and first job out of school was reintroducing endangered species back to the wild in Arizona, my native Arizona, and I was out on a black-footed ferret project where we were breeding them at the zoo and then releasing them back to the wild. And we were kind of, having a conversation. You go out real late at night to look for these things and release them. We had kind of reached the carrying capacity of that site in Arizona. And so we were breeding these and just kind of keeping the population going. And I was like, I don't want to spend the rest of my career keeping the very last of something alive. Like what's causing these things to go extinct in the first place? What could we do, address these problems at a kind of more systemic level? So I went back to graduate school. From there, I where I kind of studied on environmental economics, and then ended up at the Nature Conservancy and had a series of really formative roles there. And one of the where I kind of ended there was at NatureVest, the impact investing arm of the Nature Conservancy, working with private equity groups in the real asset space who are buying ag and water assets. And we were trying to figure out how to help deliver conservation and kind of sustainability outcomes alongside market rate returns. And we were having some real success, but it was still hard to figure out why more money wasn't coming into these kind of like environmentally focused markets, because they seemed like such good investments. We were getting good IRRs. Like I was seeing conservation outcomes happening on the ground. And so I really wanted to understand, like, how do we move more capital to these problems and these challenges? So I ended up joining AlTi Tiedemann Global, and it's a global wealth management firm. And I focus exclusively 100% of my time on funding and allocating capital to, climate strategies. And for kind of the reasons I mentioned to the top, like agriculture is a really big part of that story. And so that's kind of been the career arc the whole time, is like, how do we solve environmental problems, go deeper, really understand the connections, and then see if we can implement really practical solutions.
I think I've told you previously, like you have such a cool job. I'm so jealous of you get to just, go help deploy capital into really cool problems and cool solutions. So I'm excited to get into that more, Grant. I mean, I think like we've attended RFSI the past few years, the Regenerative Food Systems Investment Forum, and there's always just this question of like, how do we get more capital to work in regenerative, sustainable agriculture? And it just kind of like sometimes feels like this black box or like this mystery around how does this work? So I kind of want to get into some of these weeds with you of like, what does that look like? You're spending your time deploying capital, and I think you obviously were you worked on projects where you were having a positive, environmental impact, still generating good returns. Like, how is this money going to work right now? Like, what are the projects that have been maybe successful?
Yeah, so it's like you said, it's a kind of multifaceted, and it feels like a black box at times. That's part of the reason I joined AlTi, is one, to illuminate it for myself, but also for our clients, like help illuminate. You care about food and ag. It's a deeply personal issue. You want your money and your wealth to be values aligned and doing good things in the world. Like, how do we actually do that? So in the context of agriculture, one of the ways I've been really trying to think about it lately is what's the agricultural system, like overall, all the different components, supply chain, farmers on the ground, best practices, new technologies, all of these pieces. And then where can investment kind of be a valuable lever to get a good outcome within that system? So what we've been working on at AlTi is really trying to invest in regenerative agriculture and agriculture as a system. So first, we just break it up and think about it from a portfolio construction perspective, and take impact out of it for a second. You might want some credit, you might want some public equities, you might want some venture, you might want some private equity, all of these different pieces. So in agriculture, we've really been trying to do the same thing. Think about it from a portfolio construction, not only because it has to go into portfolio, so what are the actual asset classes you're investing in, but also what's the system of impact and all the different ways that you can have impact. And do you have a portfolio approach to that as well, so that you can really, it often doesn't work to put capital in one piece of the system, not the whole piece at once, because you just can't move the needle working at only one narrow part of the system. So what that might look like in the case of for many of our clients and what we have on our platform might be real assets with a more traditional private equity investor who's going to come in, buy land, operate it, 7 to 10 years, and then sell it to somebody at the end of that, but really maybe improve the practices, increase the net operating income. You get the capital appreciation, the downside protection because you actually own the land. Great from a portfolio construction perspective. Then we might also go, well, we want some venture, where we want a place that we're taking more risk, but really investing in the technologies that we think are going to lead to better outcomes. Or we might want to go, we don't want to own and operate the land. We really want to empower farmers. How do we get them more flexible credit that they can use to make the transitions that they see would be really impactful on their land? They know best. How do we put the tools in their toolbox to allow them to do that? And then in some cases, it might be even, CDFIs who are working with very specific pieces of their local community and population's demographics, where, you might be below market rate loans, but to a particular segment of the population, like Latino farmers in California, for instance, below market rate loans that help them access land. And really come into their own as farmers. So it's really trying to take a full spectrum approach across our portfolio and look for all the ways within that system that capital can have a positive impact and generate returns.
That's awesome that you're not kind of pinned in a corner with any one model. I think there's a lot of farmland funds, and it's like, unless it's farmland, it's outside their box. It's not an opportunity, but you have the kind of flexibility to kind of go where the market takes you and explore all those different opportunities. Great. Really curious, like, how are you sourcing these projects and deals? Like, how do you kind of manage the sales funnel of opportunities and investments to underwrite?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one is things like this. I mean, one, we're AlTi, we're out there allocating capital. We're looking to do this. Come find me if you're raising a fund or you're doing something interesting in the ag space. Number two, you mentioned RFSI at the beginning. I've been there the last 2 years. And it's been really helpful for meeting managers and people in the space. If you're raising a fund as a fund manager, AlTi's out there. AlTi's out there. We have a lot of, ultra high net worth clients. We're basically like a multifamily office is the way to think about us. If you're on the fundraising circuit, like, people are going to be aware of AlTi and coming to us. And then just like word of mouth, I'll talk to you guys on the phone and outside of the podcast and say, hey, what are you seeing these days? And can I introduce you to somebody? Can you introduce me? Like, we're all looking for the interesting things kind of happening out there. So it's a multifaceted approach. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that a lot of our clients spend all of their time doing this. They're really interested in the space, and they're out meeting people and they're talking to people, and they send me good ideas. So it's a kind of a top down and a bottom up approach. And maybe the last thing I'll add is I do have a little bit of where I will write a thesis a little bit around agriculture and why I think it's a good investment. And then I'll go try and find things that fit that and kind of put the flag up and say, hey, here's what we're looking for. And that's been an effective tool as well. So it's really a everything approach, Tim. I wish I could give you a more specific answer, like here's the one best way, but however you can find ideas in this world and good people to work with, we're kind of beating down that path.
Grant, I think it'd be helpful for the audience to kind of understand, this investment landscape and who is investing and how AlTi kind of fits into it. Because I think for a lot of people, for me, for the longest time, I'm like, what's an LP? What's a GP? Where is all this money? Where does this come from? So I think it'd be helpful if you could just give us a lay of the land of like the types of, you mentioned family offices, high net worth individuals. Maybe walk us through like, who do you work with? And then how do you fit into how does AlTi fit into the puzzle to go deploy that capital, and kind of break that down, I think would be helpful for listeners.
Sure. So I think maybe some of the ways that people are used to thinking about LPs or big capital allocators might be a pension fund, or your CalPERS or your, Ontario Teachers Fund or whatever it is that, has a huge pot of capital that you manage and you need to go deploy capital. But there's a large group who AlTi serves in the multifamily office space of ultra high net worth individuals or institutions, foundations, family-led businesses that are looking for advice and solutions and kind of innovative investment opportunities. Because you might have, your public market portfolio, but your private market portfolio historically might be where you kind of play and do some interesting things. We really focus on kind of total portfolio activation for some of those clients who are further along their impact journey of how can they deploy all of their capital across both of those to impact. And then we also have clients who might be making their first impact investment, and we're really like working through what does that look like. So I think about AlTi in some ways as kind of like a guides or Sherpas. Like, tell us where you're trying to go. We'll help you try and figure that out, and then we kind of help manage that portfolio and bring investments that really fit the impact that you're trying to have in the world. So for what that looks like for many of our clients, we have clients who identify as impact clients and clients who identify as non-impact clients. They may not have a single family office, with a bunch of staff, but they have enough assets or things going on that they need some support and help so that it doesn't become a full-time job, just kind of managing the family finances. And so on the climate side specifically, we invest in decarbonization technology and nature-based solutions so that these groups and their individuals and these foundations and such can really have their wealth drive positive impact in the world. And that's really the kind of core of what I focus on. And so just to give a very concrete example, maybe you were an entrepreneur who came into a bunch of money, sold a company. You now have to figure out like, well, how do I set up a trust for my kids? How do I think about how to pass on my wealth to the next generation? How do I manage kind of tax implications? And man, I have all this money now that needs to be deployed in the market. Like, what do I do? How do I do that? AlTi would help with all of that. And then if you're a foundation, maybe you have less of the family dynamics and individual dynamics, but you are making grants, let's say in the environmental sector or in the social sector, you're putting grants out there. And you're like, well, I give maybe, you're required to give 5% of your kind of endowment per year. Well, that other 95% or where that money's being generated from, for many clients, it feels disingenuous to not have that capital invested in the very similar work that they're trying to achieve through their grants. So we can say, okay, if you care about granting to agriculture, let's say in this case, and you're giving to local farmers or help supporting local co-op or whatever it is through a grant program, how do we help you invest in agriculture through your investments so that they're supporting, not working against kind of what you're trying to do at the grant level? So those tend to be, two of the client groups maybe that most specifically, we could highlight of that, might come to us for investment advice and that we kind of help guide along that impact journey.
Super helpful. I mean, the way I like to think about, or the way that I've come to think about it, right, is when you think about a high amount of capital, a large amount of capital, that capital needs to be managed, because you can't unless you're just throwing it in the S&P, it's a completely inactive investment, right? Like you have to have, especially for that amount of money, you want to be wise and about how you deploy that. And so for some families that have a huge amount of wealth, they create their own family office that has a manager on staff, on salary, that's managing, hey, what's your vision? Where do you want to deploy capital? And they're managing that amount. For other people, maybe like you mentioned, smaller family offices or high net worth individuals that are looking to, be strategic, impactful with their investing, they're going to look to kind of a manager that is a third party partner that can help them along in their journey. Am I understanding kind of that correctly?
Yeah, I think you are. And I think that, at AlTi, we also have a strategic alternatives, business that helps find, interesting investment opportunities. And the wealth management side of what we do is really a holistic offering. For some clients, it includes things like, bill pay and really getting into the weeds of like helping run their finances. And others, it's just like, here, help me manage an investment portfolio. And you might come to me in particular or AlTi because you are an entrepreneur or really care about these issues. You want something that's driven by science, but you're not a scientist. Like, that's my background. I can come do a lot of the research and bring it to you and go, here's what I'm seeing in the market. Here's what I think is interesting. Does this sound interesting to you? Are we close to what you want to accomplish in the world? Like, how do we follow up? How do we do the impact reporting? So all your investments are coming back through in a single place that you can check and understand how you're doing on both a financial and impact performance perspective. And so it's really a holistic offering. And in the impact space, I think what I tend to see is people who are on very, very different stages of this journey. Some who are ultra sophisticated and feel like they have a really firm grasp. And in some ways, I'm just kind of helping with the paperwork or due diligence on places they really want to go. And for others, it's like, I know I care about these issues, but I have no idea how to invest in these. I'm not familiar with all the different asset classes. Like, help build a portfolio and be a partner with me in doing that. And so I think your summary, Tyler, is right on. But the fun part about working at AlTi is the complexity and the difference between all our different clients. It's not a single archetype here. And so it gives a lot of different ways to deploy capital and play with capital and try and help these clients have an impact in the world.
Grant, would love to dive into a case study, just walk through kind of an example of an investment or project that you've worked on, maybe just talk about kind of like how the project got off the ground, what the timeline and investment horizon was to kind of exit that investment, what the investor return profile looked like, and maybe some of the sustainability initiatives that the project was looking to achieve.
Yeah, I'll use one from my past. I can't talk about specific investments, so I'll use one from the past to kind of give an example. So there was a project that I worked on in the past that identified a property in California that was not, I would say, allocating resources effectively. And what I mean by that is they were kind of growing a crop, if you will, that or doing a type of farming that, when the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act came into place, was not going to be sustainable over the long term. They were pumping a lot of groundwater for what they were growing. So you're depleting the aquifer in that case from like an environmental perspective, largely over pumping in an area that has lost more than 90% of its wetlands. You've got this real challenge in what the business model was. So the opportunity there, and these are the type of things that get me excited in the agricultural space in some ways, was to buy that property, convert it to an alternate use of a higher value crop, but shrink the overall acreage, and then do groundwater banking. That the groundwater bank would basically take the surface water rights that were associated with the property, bank them underground in the aquifer, and then, because the aquifer is large, another farmer could stick their straw in, essentially, into that aquifer and pump up the water that was stored in that groundwater bank on the original property. So what you've done is you've monetized the water in many ways to go fuel agriculture elsewhere and kind of adjust to the changes in the water market. A project like that is going to look like a 10-year kind of project. You're going to get in to the project. It's going to take a number of years to really test out all the soils and build the groundwater banks and do conservation easement sales and do a number of different things and then set up buyers for that water. And then the sustainability benefits that come along with that is, if you're able to do groundwater banking in that area that has lost all of its wetlands, if you build them to the right specifications, that can be that can be wetland habitat for migratory birds along the Pacific Flyway, who twice a year are going to fly from Alaska down to Chile and Chile back to Alaska in the spring and the fall on their migration patterns. And by flooding at that time, you've created pop-up habitat. And now you don't need a conservation group to go buy really expensive, important agriculture land, keep it in wetlands year round. You're able to create an economic opportunity that supports the local agriculture, rationalizes water use in some of the places, creates a profitable economic model, and delivers a lot of conservation on the side. So that's kind of one of the more innovative deals I've had the opportunity to work on in the past. But even something as simple, at AlTi of credit for farmers who want to transition to organic and helping them do that. And you do the diligence on that just like you would any other kind of fixed income product. Or you're, like I mentioned before, a private equity firm that might buy land and change the operations, maybe convert it to organic in some cases, maybe install solar so that more and electric pumps so that the carbon emissions on the property go down, or build farm worker housing that support the farmers who work on that land and improve their training to really help them grow. So there's a number of different strategies where in each circumstance we're looking kind of for different impact targets, different financial returns, different timelines, but that very much mimic traditional underwriting when we do them, but with an additional layer of what's the impact and how do we deliver that on the same time frame as the financial returns.
All right, Grant, I want to pivot to kind of some of your views on the industry. I think you have a really unique position, seeing deals, seeing up and coming fund managers and what they're working on. You have this systematic approach to investing. So let's start with a fun one. What's your ag hot take?
My ag hot take right now is I don't think we're talking about crop yields enough. So I think if you go to RFSI, there's a really interesting thing. There tends to be a lot of focus on inputs, right? And regenerative agriculture inputs, water use, fertilizers, the switch to organic, some of those other pieces. But I think that when you think about like the environmental concern that comes from agriculture, a huge part of it is how do you feed the world? How are you going to grow enough food to feed the world? And when you think about farmer profitability, there is some level of just like more crops in many cases is a way to generate more income. Not always, and certainly you can think about price premiums and for different practices. But I think when you talk about a lot of regenerative practices, you might get down to like, well, the soil retains more water, or the new biological kind of fertilizers that we're using help the microbes and fix more nitrogen. All of that is great, but really what that comes back to is like, what does that do to crop yields? And I think that we sometimes overlook that as a key piece of what we're doing. And when I hear some of the concerns and more apocalyptic language around agriculture, where I think we have very real problems, but like sometimes you hear like, well, we only have 50 or so harvests left. I don't think that's really supported by any data that I can find. And I think it's very, context dependent. But what you're really saying in that situation is like, how are we going to feed the world? And so I think crop yields really become a core component of this. And if you look at history, like U.S. fertilizer use hasn't really grown since the 70s, but food production has increased by 75% in that time. And, synthetic fertilizers are a big reason that we've been able to have a 6-fold increase in crop harvest from the 1900s to 2000. Like that really, really matters. And when we take our impact to a global scale, like Africa is so underproducing relative to what it could with improved practices, fertilizers, those other things. And so I think we have to be a little bit careful about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater in some of these contexts and go, fundamentally, agriculture is about like yield and crop production. How do we get that yield in a way that is really healthy for the environment, that supports the farmers' livelihoods, that grows nutritious food and for the people who consume it? But I think that we can't lose the focus on crop yield. And I wish I heard a little bit more about that in some of the conversations we're having lately.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I think yield is something that's top of mind for most farmers, where it's one variable within their operation where they can actually drive revenue, where oftentimes their pricing is fixed, and the only way that they can really drive revenue and profitability is really hitting yield targets and goals. And if we are asking farmers to kind of replace current practices and try new stuff, like they can't they're not in a position to sacrifice yield. And so that needs to be part of the conversation of like anything we're asking of like being able to maintain or improve yields and not push farmers to make changes that are going to decrease yields and just hope you make it up on saving the expenses is just not the right path for a lot of these different strategies. So I think you're spot on with that call out. Grant, would love to talk about kind of your predictions for the future. You've been in the space for quite a while. Like, where do you see the investment in ag and food and ag space going?
Yeah, maybe a couple of different things that are top of mind lately. And one is I think there is some consolidation coming. I think you're going to see more institutional investors in the space. And that's something I'm really paying close attention to because I think that could be good and bad. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's bad if we squeeze more farmers into short-term leases and increase pressure about how they operate and do all that. I think it could be good if you have people in the local community who are really thinking about the supply chain and getting high-value crops to market. And what does that mean for the opportunities for the other farmers that are supplying the same processing facility, for instance, to really get a price premium and get on a vendor shelf. So I think that there's some really interesting things coming with consolidation there, and the ability for larger groups to come in and have a little bit more capital for CapEx to do some of the changes of, switching out for electric pumps in an area, and getting away from diesel. I think there's going to be some interesting things that come out of it. And I'm just very curious what that looks like. Two other ones that I'm most excited about is I think cheaper energy is going to have a dramatic impact on agriculture. Even if you take the most extreme example of what if you could just do desalination much, much more cheaply because the energy to run it was cheaper. And then you pumped water back up the Stanislaus River or the Merced or the King River, or these other places in California, and just water scarcity wasn't as big an issue. What would that really do to agriculture and how a farmer operates? Could be deeply meaningful. And I think as cheaper energy in the form of solar comes into play, I think there's some really downstream effects for agriculture that could be really, really interesting. And then maybe the last one is I think synthetic biology is going to have a huge impact on agriculture, whether it's kind of like fertilizers that fix nitrogen by really understanding microbes, whether it's biomarkers in plants that help you signal their health so you know when to apply what or what to do. And then I think it gets into the genetic, want to stay away a little bit from the genetically modified crop argument because it's such a heated, discussion topic. But I think we're getting to the point where with CRISPR technologies and others that are coming into play, the ability to help plants be drought resistant in a time of climate change where you're going to get more variable water, or to fix them with B12 so that you can make a credible case that you can give up some of the beef you're eating and still get the nutrients that you need from a more plant-based diet. I think synthetic biology has a chance to be quite meaningful in many places of the world, and I'm quite excited to see what that does. And it's a focus of where I'm looking in venture right now, because I think the cheaper energy and the synthetic biology piece put together create some really, really interesting investment opportunities and impact opportunities as well.
Love those. Those are some great call outs. Grant, I want to wrap up with maybe a principle that you kind of live by that you shared with us before. I think was really cool.
I have really tried and live every day with this kind of notion that this is probably the best day in human history. And you may not realize that, but it's hard to ignore it. And I really have this belief, every month working in climate, I get a new report. Okay, hottest month on record. But I really think that if you could do human progress in the same way, if you had a measure, I think you'd see kind of the same thing. Overall, we're having more joy, less suffering. And I think that agriculture is this really interesting example of this, where we've increased yield so much. We are reducing fertilizer uses in many parts of the world. We've kind of reached peak land use. We've reached peak fertilizer use, or at least very close to, I think, in many contexts. And so I'm really personally very excited about where we're headed in this world. And so I think there's huge problems ahead of us that we need to solve. Our to-do list is long. These are hard problems. It's going to be disruptive. It's going to be messy, but every problem we face, there's a solution for, and they'll create new problems that we'll need solutions for. But I really am quite hopeful and joyful over the work that we have ahead of us. And I think that I hope that optimism doesn't come off as kind of Panglossian or anything of that sort, but is clear-eyed about what the challenges really are, but gives people the hope to like roll up your sleeves and get to work. Because in the agriculture community, I expect is one that's very good at that kind of mantra, is just like, go do the work. Because I think there's great things to be done, and a lot of fertile ground, a lot of great harvests here to reap from that hard work.
Love that outlook and mindset. And I think that's a great place to wrap it, Grant. It's been a ton of fun talking to you. As we wrap up, how can our listeners get in touch and connect with you and AlTi?
Yeah, you can find us at altiglobal.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and just Google me from the show notes, and I'm sure you'll be able to find me. And always happy to talk to anybody who's interested in deploying capital in this space, looking for capital in this space, or just want to make a better world, want to make a better place in this world through impact investing.
So, Ty, what do you think of that conversation with Grant?
I think it just shed more light on this black box of investing, right? Like, who are these people? Why are they investing in regenerative and impact agriculture, right? Like, I think it was just helpful to understand how AlTi plays a role in kind of this ecosystem and how they differentiate and how they look at things. So I think that was really helpful. And I think the portfolio approach makes a ton of sense, right? Being able to invest in real assets, in businesses, in venture, I think is really interesting. If you want that one-stop shop that has kind of that focus on impact, on regenerative and sustainable agriculture, it's a great, I think, solution for folks that are looking to deploy their capital. So I thought that was really enlightening.
Well, guys, hope you enjoyed this conversation. We're actually going to be back this Friday talking to Jack Richardson about his latest edition of the Modern Acre newsletter.
If you haven't subscribe to the Modern Acre newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Make sure you read his edition on Thrive Market ahead of our conversation with him coming on Friday.